I'm Rhett Nelson with EastIdahoNews.com. We've been talking a lot about the Moose Fire over the last 2 months since it started. It's now the largest active wildfire in the U.S. And today I've got Rebecca Ladnier here with us to give us an update and answer some of the questions that we've been getting from you. Rebecca, thanks for taking some time with us today.
Glad to be here. Thanks for letting me be able to have this interview and share some information about the Moose Fire.
Yeah. Rebecca, by the way, is a public information officer on the Moose Fire. She's been there. Have you been there since the very beginning?
No, I've only been here about 10 days.
Okay. So she is, as she told me before we started talking, she's been living in a tent and been on scene there for quite some time. And so she is living an adventure right now.
I guess you could call it that, yes.
Yeah. So let's start. As I said in the introduction, the Moose Fire is now the largest active wildfire in the U.S., and it's on August 18th. It will be 2 months old. Is there any comment you want to say, first of all, on those 2 points?
I would just like to say, as you stated, that the fire started on July 17th. It quickly jumped the Salmon River, so they were trying to fight fire on both sides of that river. The first day, there were 2 Type 1 helicopters, 5 single-engine air tankers, and large air tankers dropping water on the fire. But there were only 3 hand crews and 1 engine on the ground at that point. So with the ongoing drought, the red flag fire weather conditions, including, I understand that day, winds possibly gusting up to 50 miles an hour, it just wasn't enough to catch the fire early on. Within 2 days, it was over 12,000 acres, and aircraft were limited because of the high winds they were experiencing. So fire managers started talking about protecting values at risk, and we'll talk more about that in just a minute. So within just 1 week, it had grown to 32,000 acres. And if you go to InsaWeb, where we update information every day, and look back at the fire updates from the beginning, it gives a really good picture of what was going on in the early days of the fire. And since that time, firefighters have continued to be challenged by a fire that's spreading in several directions at once. It's tremendously steep terrain, and the weather and fuel conditions are just at unprecedented levels. And I will say that, fire managers are committed to containing the Moose Fire as quickly as possible, but so far the efforts have been hampered by several challenges.
So what's the current acreage on the fire?
So that they weren't able to do an infrared flight last night. So the acreage as of yesterday, and what we're still going with today, is 107,523 acres. And they're still saying that it's about 44% contained, but it was very active yesterday afternoon, and it challenged the control lines. And we had to take some action there to bring crews back to a safe area. And then we also asked for the mines in front of the fire to be evacuated. And we de-energized or asked the power company to de-energize a power line that feeds those mines and about 10 residences.
I see. Okay. So let's start with, well, I need to ask you, it is a human-caused fire. Is there any news on that investigation, on specifically how it started?
No, it's still under investigation, so no other information than to affirm that it is human-caused.
Okay. Got it. Let me go back to a few days after the fire started. We had some helicopter pilots that were assisting with firefighting efforts, and they tragically were killed. Do you have anything to say on that? Was there a reluctance to resume flight operations in the wake of that?
I wasn't here, so I don't know if there was a reluctance, but I would say that it was unlikely because there was still a fire to be fought and firefighters and values to be protected.
Has it had it has to have had an impact on fire personnel on scene.
It it always does. So wildland firefighting, I've been involved with it for about 35 years now, and it's a wonderful profession, and you develop a family around shared experiences. And I can't speak for the people who were here at that time, but for my own personal experience with a similar incident, I can tell you that the impact is first disbelief, that it doesn't happen to you, it happens to other people. And then you have a shock, and then you have a really profound grief. But a tragedy such as this helicopter crash, it's always an opportunity to stop and to question whether we're using the right tool in the right place and at the right time. It's a hazardous profession, both on the ground and in the air. Um, but we do all that we know how to do to lessen those hazards and risks.
It's very tragic. And I believe they've had a memorial service for those pilots.
I believe they have in their hometowns. I don't know the details of those. I do know that on July 29th, that the body of pilot Thomas Hayes was transported from Salmon, and the community turned out, lined the streets, to show respect and honor for him and the sacrifice he made.
Well, our hearts are certainly with the families. It's such a bit of sad news, but they gave their lives trying to serve the community, trying to protect.
That's right.
And put out fires, and that's definitely something to be honored. So let's get into, as this fire has gone on, we at East Idaho News get lots of questions. And one of the main questions that we get is, why can't the firefighters just put the fire out? They spend so much time spreading it around. And so I was hoping maybe you could speak to that and help explain why that is, and how the daily process works.
Sure. So I have a couple of maps that, if you would like, I can share on my screen. Okay. That might be very helpful to understand this conversation.
Be great.
So what we're looking at here, this very colorful map, is what we call a progression map. And you see right in the center where my hand is, this is where it started on July 17th. And it shows it at about 1,532 acres of growth that day. And then on July 18th, where my hand is, it shows it that day, it grew 10,750 acres. And as we go on, we can see the very next day, it grew in several directions. This direct on the on the west side of the fire, on the east side, and then to the south, and a little bit to the north in that lighter purple shading there, it grew over 4,000 acres. And as you go out and look at the dates and the shading, you can see how the fire progressed. And you can see a little bit by the shading, the kind of topography that firefighters are facing. And as I zoom out, you can see the orange and the deep red is the areas with the most heat, the last time that they flew the infrared. And of course, that's on the southernmost area of the fire. So it's progressing to the south. And then with the winds we've had from the west and southwest, it's also progressing to the east as well. Any questions about that map?
I don't think so, no.
Okay. Now, I mentioned values at risk, and this is what we call an operations map, where they have identified some of those values. These are things that we definitely want to protect. One of the things is the watershed for the city of Salmon down here. This line here that my hand is following is a power line. It goes just below Leesburg, and it continues on to the Blackbird mine, the Cobalt mine, and we also have the Bear Track mine, which may not be on this map. But other values at risk, all the purple dots are values, and they could be residences or historic features places that we want to protect. And, one dot could maybe represent a cluster of homes or cabins or something like that. So, okay, so I'm going to stop sharing that. So that gives you an idea of how the fire managers go about deciding where we're going to put the resources to fight the fire, because we can't just fight it on every front of that it's spreading all at once.
When the fire initially started, it's the flame started in terrain that's, brush and trees and things like that. I mean, if firefighters were to just attack it and try to put it all out, what would happen? Would it be very effective?
Well, it depends. If they can attack it when it's a campground, campfire. If it was a campfire, I'm not sure what it was, but say it was a campfire and it was in a campground where it's fairly level, and they were right there with an engine, they might could spray it out. But once it gets into steep and rocky terrain, people are on foot. They have a limited amount of water. You have, the conditions of the fuel, and it spreads very rapidly once it gets into that kind of terrain. So I would say that the biggest challenges in fighting this fire, first of all, we have an ongoing drought, and that has led to record dry fuels, fuels as dry as they've ever seen them here. We've had record high temps, as you know, and we've had humidity down into the single digits. And at times we've had strong gusty winds. So when all four of those factors align, we see extreme and erratic fire behavior, and you can't engage it directly. We can add to that again the terrain, some long distance spotting that has occurred in front of the fire, and the fire moving into areas that haven't burned in a very long time. So in those areas, the fuels are abundant and they're continuous. So it's really hard to slow down the fire in those areas. And we need to keep in mind that history has proven that fires in this country can move extremely fast. In 2000, there was a fire called the Shell Rock Fire. It progressed 13 miles in one day. So that's something that we have to remember. We can't just forget those things that have happened in the past. Have to keep that in mind as we make a plan to go forward with this fire. And then I can explain a little bit about, you asked about why we spread it around, as you put it. So yeah. I can explain a little bit about tactics as well.
Yeah.
So, when a fire is reported, it takes some time for the firefighters and other resources to get their engines, aircraft, that sort of thing. And sometimes those resources aren't readily available. They're not just sitting here. If there's a lot of other fires going on around the country, we have to compete for just a limited amount of resources. The resources aren't unlimited. So then the firefighters and managers, again, they ask where it would be safe to put the firefighters and the aircraft, in a particular location. So we don't always directly engage the fire. We may have to go back to a place that is more accessible and more defensible. So again, Salmon River country is extremely rugged and challenging, even without a fire coming at you. So through the hard learned lessons, fire managers, they strive to put firefighters in areas where the probability of success is good. And that success includes getting everyone home safely. So the approach that we use now is to look at where the fire could go. You have the fire and they kind of look around it. You can call it a big box. Where could the fire go? And then they identify those values at risk, like I showed you on that map. And all those things we have on the Moose Fire. We have homes, communities, a watershed, power lines, mines and wells. So all those things we've identified as values at risk on this fire. Then we put the crews and the aircraft in a position to best defend those values. And on this fire, some of the examples of things we've done to protect those values. We've put sprinklers in place around structures. Some structures have been wrapped in a fire-resistant material, like historic structures, like the Doreno Lookout and some of the homes and cabins. Fire breaks have been built, usually along existing roads. They can remove fuels along those corridors and create fire breaks up to 300 feet wide. And they've also done that along the power line, widened the corridor where the fuel is removed adjacent to that power line. So the idea is when the fire gets to that fire break, there's nothing for it to burn, so it's going to slow down or stop. The problem we've had is that the fire can, before it gets to those control lines, it can spot beyond it. So the firefighters are constantly vigilant for those spot fires and trying to put those out before they grow too much.
By the way, I should probably ask, I probably should have asked this when you had that map up, but where you showed us where the power lines were, is that on the other side of that? So I guess the south side of that power line, is that where all the homes are in the area?
No, they're scattered throughout. Let's see if I can pull it up again. So I understand up in this area.
Okay.
Zoom in. In this area of the fire here, Moose Creek Road, and up in that area, that there are some homes up in there. And then over along Panther Creek Road, that up in these draws, that there are some homes up in there. And there's probably some other areas where homes are scattered throughout the forest.
Got it. And thankfully,
and this does show the Bear Track mine. I didn't see that earlier, but it's here just above Leesburg. So.
Got it. And thankfully, up to this point, we haven't, other than the pilots that were killed, we haven't had any other injuries that have been reported. But I know there have been some evacuations.
The Bear Track mine was evacuated yesterday, and early in the fire, yes, there were some other areas that were evacuated.
Got it.
Yeah, in the Salmon-Challis National Forest, unfortunately, has a history of fires that have experienced firefighter entrapments and fatalities. So, firefighting is inherently dangerous, but we're no longer willing to put firefighter lives at risk without assessing why we should accept that risk.
So another question that people often wonder about is, this fire is burning on federal land. And so is this, is national funding provided? Because you talked about you have to deal with limited resources, and there's some competition for that with other fires that are happening around the country. So do you want to talk about, do you guys get national funding for this? And is that funding contingent on your ability to fight the fire?
No. Well, yes and no. So yes, we get federal funding, and no, we don't have to worry about getting the funds. We try to control the cost as much as possible to do the job that needs to be done. So we don't have to worry about getting the funds, but we do have to, sometimes we can't always get all the resources we need, as you just said.
So how much funding has been set aside for this fire so far?
So to date, 71 million has been spent on the Moose Fire.
71 million. Do you know what the most expensive fire to date has been?
Actually, I don't.
Okay. $71 million, but on a, there's usually a big wildfire every year. Is this a fairly common amount that's spent for wildfire?
I think the rate of the spending is not uncommon.
I thought of another question, so I'm kind of backstepping here a little bit, so I apologize. When you're fighting the fire, so you're attacking this from multiple angles. You got forces on the ground that are fighting it, but then you have like air tankers and helicopters and things like that that are dropping fire retardant on the flames. What is the effectiveness of the fire retardant versus using just water?
Well, the effect of the retardant is to make the water um, more sticky, basically. So, water in a hot, dry climate is going to evaporate very quickly, and the fire retardant helps it stick to the vegetation and not evaporate.
I see. So the two work in tandem then.
Mm-hmm, right.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
so, yeah, the retardant is actually a chemical that's mixed with the water.
Got
Mm-hmm.
it. So the retardant doesn't directly put out the flame. It just helps the water go farther and be more.
That's right. So fire takes oxygen, fuel, and heat uh, to have a fire, and the retardant helps take away the oxygen, basically, and to an extent the heat as well.
I'm interested too in the impact that this will, like, once the flames are out and it's gone,
Mm-hmm.
there's thousands and thousands of acres that will have been impacted by this. I hear people in Idaho talk all the time about how the impact of a wildfire is, long term can be a good thing because it helps renew the environment. Is the long term effect of this overall a positive thing for the forest land?
I guess that's yet to be seen. What I can tell you is that, for instance, where the moose fire has come to an area where there was previously a fire, it does tend to slow down and burn more sporadically because there's less fuel. So certainly having some fire on the landscape, whether it be a prescribed burn or an old fire scar, does help with future fire control. There are some benefits, but how long those benefits take to be seen varies with the fire intensity. And
Oh, it just kind of depends.
it depends. And, immediately, one of the not so positive effects we've seen is because of the steepness of the country, some of that vegetation holds the rocks and boulders in place. And when that burns, those can be dislodged. And we have had some rocks and boulders fall, like on the Salmon River Road. And so that's one thing, the instability that can follow a wildfire if it burns intensely and consumes most of the vegetation. And most fires will burn in a mosaic. They'll have areas that burn intensely and areas that don't.
At last report, they were estimating full containment on October 31st. Is that still the case?
That is still the date they are expecting full containment. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Rebecca, I appreciate you taking some time. Anything else that you think would be important for people to know as we kind of wrap this up?
No, I would just like to say that the firefighters have appreciated the hospitality of the community of Salmon, and they've just been very welcoming to us and have let us have expressed their gratitude every chance they get. As an information officer, I've talked to quite a few people since I've been here, and it really means a lot to the firefighters, the overwhelming support that is expressed by the community.
One thing I know about Idaho is people in Idaho love their first responders.
Yeah.
We appreciate all the efforts that people like you and many other people on scene do. Okay. Well, Rebecca, thank you very much. I appreciate the information.